You jibber jab, bamboozle, nuka, noozle, bippity bop, she-gall. You jibber jab, bamboozle, nuka, noozle, bippity bop, she-gall. I mean, you keep on talking, but you don't know where to turn it off.
Hi, thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Jessica Corry, and tonight guest hosting for John Caldera, KBDI's favorite host. We face serious economic concerns in this country, but we're here tonight to separate fact from fiction. Is this as bad as the Great Depression? What, if anything, will help our economy recover? And what can you do there at home to help your pocketbook, your local community, and your children? Tonight we have with us two great economists, one from Atlanta and one from Michigan. We have first Mr. Lawrence Reed. He is the president of the Foundation for Economic Education. Thank you so much, Mr. Reed, for being with us
My
here
pleasure,
tonight.
Jessica.
And next we have Mason Drake, and Mason is an economist as well as a specialist in the commercial real estate sector. He lives in Atlanta. Thanks, Mason, for being with us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So let's open this up and just start talking about how bad are things out there now? Are we going to see an economic recovery? Are we there? Colorado's really seeing some conflicting numbers. We've got unemployment at almost 8%, but we're starting to see some recovery in the residential housing market. What's the outlook like nationally?
Well, if you look around the country, you'll find places where we do have double-digit unemployment, and most people would agree that when you have that on a national scale, you've got something approaching a depression. But clearly, this is a recession. It's a serious one, but it's not a depression. Unemployment at about 8.5% nationwide is serious, but not anywhere near as bad as it was, say, during the Great Depression, when unemployment was about 26, 27%. And it's not as bad as it was in the '82 recession, when it was in a neighborhood of 10 or 11%.
So why do you think, and I'll open this up to you, Mason, why do you think there is just so much anxiety if we see this in a historic context where maybe things aren't that bad?
I think there's so much anxiety because of a lack of clear thinking on what the solutions are to the current problems we're facing. So when you're being told that the answer to our current financial crisis is for government to spend far more than ever before, I think it registers with people that have a good deal of common sense that that's not going to work. So I think a lot of the anxiety we're faced with is just an innate understanding that the solutions being batted around in government aren't going to cut it.
Let's talk about some of those solutions. Barack Obama came to Denver in February to sign his $800 billion stimulus package. How much will that end up costing America? And is this the last we'll see? We keep hearing he might come back for more, or that we're going to see other types of federal growth in government. What is your projection?
Well, the talk in Washington is all in the direction of more of this kind of thing, even though there's not much to show for the massive hundreds of billions of dollars we spent to date. If the economy does begin to improve, and I think in the near term it may well, it won't be because of the spending. It'll be because of what they're doing with monetary policy, that is expanding money and credit, driving interest rates low. But unfortunately, if we get that lift because of monetary policy, all the government spending will probably get a lot of the credit. But government spending, I don't think there's a time in history where you can say that government spending more actually stimulated the economy, because you have to ask, where does it get the money? If it spends more, it's because you and I either have that much less to spend, or it simply prints the money, which comes at the expense of the value of the currency and sets us up for the next economic downturn.
There's a saying that the side that wins the war gets to write the history book. And you are the author of The Great Myths of the Great Depression, which you can get on the Foundation for Economic Education's website. But what you say is that one of the greatest myths of the Great Depression is that FDR's New Deal saved America from the failure of free market capitalism. Explain that.
Well, so many Americans have been sold this idea that because he gave great speeches and the Depression eventually did end, that it must have been his policies that did it. But 8 years into the Roosevelt period, we still had a deep depression. We still had unemployment approaching 20%. The time of Roosevelt's first and second terms, really, that's 8 years of endless efforts to jumpstart the economy that failed. In fact, most Americans don't know that in 1937, Roosevelt gave us a first. We had a depression within a depression. The economy was showing some signs of life in 36, and all of a sudden we had in 1937 the biggest economic collapse in American history. So
what did bring us out of the Great Depression then?
Well, it really didn't, the economy didn't really begin to recover in a meaningful way until after World War II. Now, it's true that during the war, in some ways, it looked better because we took 11 million unemployed and sent them over to Europe. But there was no improvement in standards of living or the general economy during the war years. Afterwards, you had a much less hostile administration under Harry Truman, and there are a lot of things I would say I wished he hadn't done. But he wasn't beating on American business every day as FDR was. And so there was a lot of renewed confidence in the Truman years on the part of business to reinvest and get things moving again. You didn't have that when Roosevelt was in office because he was always making war on American business, raising taxes. He tried at one point to get a 100% income tax rate on all incomes over $25,000. That's not the kind of environment where you'd expect people to want to invest.
So Mason, you're part of the Obama generation, and I don't know who you voted for, but how do you communicate to people as a free market economist, as a father, a 27-year-old father of 2 young children, how do you communicate to your generation that deficit spending does not ensure or even bring us the hope of economic prosperity?
I think people innately understand it. You can't, if they look at their own finances, they can't spin their way into prosperity. We're all told by financial advisors that if we want to do well for our personal families, we have to save and invest and so forth. And an economy is the same, just on a larger scale. There's really no such thing as an economy that can be tweaked and adjusted and turn a dial here and fix it. The economy is made up of thousands and millions and hundreds of millions of individual people making decisions based on profit and loss, supply and demand, how to supply to the market.
So let me stop you there. How do we communicate this to people? Because if we had time, an hour to sit down and communicate these issues, certainly I would agree with your positions that if we understand this on a house-by-house model, that we all understand when it comes to balancing our checkbook that we can't spend more than we have. But how do we communicate this to people in an era where we've got a president who's even more glamorous, perhaps even more or better received than FDR ever was?
I think we have to change our language somewhat. I think we have to communicate that the people harmed most by bad economic policy are those on the bottom rungs of society, the poorest, the single mothers with children, and those that are trying to gain a foot up in the world are the ones harmed most by bad economic thinking.
Let's get into some of that now. Give us some of the statistics on what deficit spending and what the modern welfare state have done for single mothers, for our poorest families, racial minorities, and elderly communities, those types of areas.
Well, you recall back in the late 90s under Bill Clinton, we ended the federal entitlement to welfare. And that was because there was a general consensus that $5.2 trillion after the start of the Great Society and all the welfare spending that brought, that we were only destroying families, pulling people apart, that we were paying fathers to leave the home, and that we were making things pretty nice for poverty bureaucrats, but not for the people these programs were intended to help. And so we got government somewhat out of that. Now we're getting back into it again. The fact is that trillions of dollars later, the poverty rate in America is not much different than it was when the Great Society under Lyndon Johnson was started up. And if you look at the 40 years before that, the American free enterprise economy was actually bringing the poverty rate down steadily. It flattened out when government got involved and decided, well, we'll help things along. But now we know that a lot of people have gone to Washington to do good, and apparently they've done very well, but at the expense often of the people they're supposed to help.